Hello, my name is Carlos Montemayor. Uh, it's a great pleasure to deliver this talk on animal consciousness in comparison to human consciousness for the Cognitive Science Society meeting in 2021. I'll talk about the evolutionary markers that give rise or produce the emergence of consciousness. Cognitive approaches to consciousness appeal to rational or epistemic traits. That means traits for getting knowledge from the environment and learning from the environment in order to demarcate the boundary between conscious and non-conscious species. If a specific cluster of traits is present in a species, then it should qualify as conscious, according to this approach. This has a very critical advantage, which is that a comparative and biologically informed cognitive approach affords the possibility of studying consciousness from a non-anthropocentric perspective, which is, I think, the right perspective to study consciousness from an empirical point of view. Ginsburg and Jablonka in their 2019 important work bring insights from evolutionary biology and animal cognition, articulating one of the most thorough cognitive approaches to consciousness. Their key claim is that unlimited associative learning serves as a distinctive set of traits that suffices to attribute consciousness to a species. It's an evolutionary transition marker, according to them, a package of cognitive capacities which jointly suffice for grounding phenomenal consciousness. Given the nature of this cluster of capacities, a central question is what possible relation these capacities might bear to other cognitive abilities that are not sufficient for consciousness, but that are nonetheless necessary for conscious awareness. Attention skills in the development of unlimited associative learning present the difficulty that they may not be just developmentally related to unlimited associative learning, but in fact, they might be explanatory of unlimited associative learning. So the main difficulty is that all the types of attention involved in unlimited associative learning can be dissociated from consciousness, particularly the kind of consciousness that is called phenomenal consciousness. What is it like to experience something? This means that while attention skills for unlimited associative learning might be necessary for consciousness, they are not sufficient because they can all occur unconsciously. There are various ways of understanding this claim. One of them is from the empirical perspective, many findings that show that various forms of learning, but also various forms of conceptual and high order attention can occur unconsciously, but also just in principle, attention is a different, seems to be, and many people agree, is a different kind of function that differs from conscious awareness. So the difficulty is that unlimited associative learning may indeed be a very important transition, but it may just involve attention, very important types of attention that allow a creature to become much more intelligent and adaptable, but nonetheless not sufficient for phenomenal consciousness. To expand on this, cross-modal attention for unlimited associative learning without necessitating any specific phenomenal character provides a better explanation of the evidence from the field of animal cognition that, for example, Ginsburg and Jablonka examine in such detail. The evolutionary transition to unlimited associative learning, which, according to Ginsburg and Jablonka, and to a large extent it seems to be correct that it occurred likely during the Cambrian periods, is based on attention skills, according to this opinion on their view. These are attention skills for navigation and predatory behavior, rather than on the intricate phenomenon of the first-person perspective and of phenomenal consciousness. Consider that some kind of dependence on language seems to be part of what is it like for humans to be reflectively conscious, but none such requirement can be imposed on other animals. So even though it is highly likely that other animals are conscious, it doesn't seem to require the kind of consciousness we have, on the one hand, and on the other, uh, many of the capacities they have are best explained in terms of attention, rather than the kind of phenomenal consciousness that humans possess. Given that attention suffices to explain unlimited associative learning, but attention does not suffice to explain phenomenal consciousness, at least not in the case of humans, unlimited associative learning needs not suffice for consciousness. Or at least this is something that needs further clarification. Thus, one can grant that unlimited associative learning is a major transition in the evolution of cognitive capacities. And in this, I think Ginsburg and Jablonka are absolutely correct that it's a major transition, and that it constitutes a cognitively integrated kind of epistemic perspective. But there are reasons for questioning that this marker is sufficient for phenomenal consciousness, such as those I just mentioned regarding the dissociation between consciousness and attention. The evidence offered in the animal cognition literature, and also examined by Ginsburg and Jablonka, however, justifies unlimited associative learning as a necessary, but perhaps insufficient, condition for phenomenal consciousness of the type, again, that human beings enjoy, or the capacities that human beings have for experiencing what is it like to have qualitative states. If this is correct, that unlimited associative learning is a necessary condition for phenomenal consciousness, this would be enormous progress in the debate on the nature of consciousness, particularly concerning the scientific evidence. Looking for a marker like universal associative learning is definitely a step in the right direction towards making the debate on phenomenal consciousness more scientifically rigorous and less anthropocentric. Again, something that is really key to arrive at a correct understanding, a proper understanding of consciousness as a phenomenon that can be studied in other species. Therefore, this comment is just an invitation to clarify this issue, more than a thoroughgoing criticism. So I largely agree with the key claims of Ginsburg and Jablonka. I just find that this key claim they make is not sufficiently justified, because unlimited associative learning may be fully explained by various forms of attention. And in order to explain this in a little bit more detail, I would like to talk about this chart that comes from something I published with Harry Haladian back in 2015 on the evolution of conscious attention. And although this graph is not perfect, so for example, these developments need not be hierarchical, or none of these forms of attention need to be better than others. Just like in evolution, everything evolves in different contexts, so there's no metric for comparison. It is nonetheless useful to think of this as a temporal development of various forms of attention, the way Ginsburg and Jablonka think of the major transition towards unlimited associative learning. So what we have here is various forms of attention that are very well documented and studied in the literature. Some of them concern just very basic signal detection, some very basic sensory receptors, some feature-based forms of attention, some quite robust forms of spatial attention for navigation, egocentric frames of reference that order and frame attention in terms of background and foreground, some forms of monitoring cause specifics and other relevant animals in the environment, more robust base of object-based attention, perhaps even conceptually based, more voluntary and effortful forms of attention, etc. There are various developments, and it seems that where universal unlimited associative learning could fit in is once we have some form of multimodal integration, where several forms of attention can be deployed in order to learn flexibly from the environment. And again, this need not, this part of the graph, this red arrow, may explain various of the capacities for unlimited associative learning concerning new stimuli and flexible behavior, and nonetheless not explain what is required to have subjective phenomenal consciousness, or a perspective that is what is it like for a subject to experience something. There are two other components to this graph, which is about the evolution of conscious attention, phenomenally conscious attention. Just like there were those developments, there might be developments that are necessary for consciousness to emerge. Here, an interesting idea is that multimodal integration of a complex kind for top-down and bottom-up routines, which seem to be necessary for both unlimited associative learning and consciousness, may fully explain the kind of consciousness that Ned Block calls access consciousness, namely access to information that is used or poised to be used for thought, action, and planning. Attention, especially of the cross-modal integrated kind, seems perfectly suited to fulfill this role. However, other forms of consciousness seem a little bit more difficult to explain in these terms. One of them is phenomenal consciousness, which I've been focusing on. There are other aspects of phenomenal consciousness that are also difficult to explain in terms of unlimited associative learning and access consciousness. One of them is full-blown conscious mind reading and empathy. Another one is language, which I also briefly mentioned, and self-awareness. Subsumption is the idea that conscious awareness is integrated in different ways and more robustly than the way attention contents are integrated. And that also is perhaps not fully explained by unlimited associative learning. So the idea or the proposal in this invitation to develop more why or how unlimited associative learning could suffice to explain phenomenal consciousness rather than just be a necessary condition for it is that there must be some evolutionary bridge between attention and consciousness. Perhaps they largely overlap and there's very little difference. Certainly there is a difference because we know that unconscious cognition can play a major role in intelligent behavior. So while the overlap could be very vast in these, it need not be complete. They're not identical, attention and consciousness. So a key question here is, in their overlap, which aspects of those overlaps could be fully explained by unlimited associative learning, and which ones may not be explained by such kind of learning? It seems that unified multimodal integration and very flexible forms of learning could be a bridge between certainly some forms of consciousness and attention, but again, those may be fully explained by access consciousness. Whereas others, like having a self-narrative or self-reflection based on language, could fundamentally depend upon something like unlimited associative learning, but then other capacities may be necessary besides those learning capacities for consciousness to emerge. In other words, it might be important to consider the separate paths during the evolution of our species with respect to other species concerning styles of cognition that may be more dependent on attention than consciousness, whereas other forms of cognition may require consciousness more than attention. And the claim is that more needs to be said about unlimited associative learning for it to be fully sufficient for consciousness of the phenomenal kind. Thank you very much for your attention. This is my information, and I look forward to our session and discussion.